Behold, my glorious supporter, Flipz, has requested a Zandy Levirian. Flipz says, it turns out that the distant future of the Orcan Empire in Warframe was actually closer to 5 minutes into the future than the future generations away from us that the game seems to imply. In other words, the Orcan Empire situation is actually happening quite soon, right now, in this thought experiment, rather than many, many generations after our current situation, which is what the game kind of suggests. So, the Orcan Empire is happening right now. As a loyal and industrious Warframe content creator, I definitely all three of those things Warframe content and creator. You've been selected to become an immortal and possibly also immoral Oracan. Uh-oh. And as part of this bargain, you will be given a loyal Warframe servant to lead your extended support staff in carrying out your every whim. Wise choice, Oracan Council. You came to the right guy. What Warframe do you choose to have assigned to you? What do you have them do? What turn of fate leads them to join the eventual Tenno Rebellion, and what consequences do they leave behind in their wake? Cool. Yeah, so for people unfamiliar, a lot of the story of the Warframes revolves around the idea that in the Orcan Empire, way back when, there was kind of an original, this is the way I interpret it, kind of an original, for example, Protea. And they might have been a bodyguard or an assistant in some way to a certain high-ranking Orcan official. And they did various things in that employ. But the Tenno were essentially just extremely high-ranking bodyguards using the Warframes to assist some high-ranking Oracan. So I'm being put in this position, and then it's like, what Warframe would I choose? Now, you added a little addendum, Flipz, that says I can pick one that there's already been a Levirian on. In other words, I'm allowed to pick a Warframe that we already know what the canonical origin is for. But that no, nah, come on. So anyway, I will pick a Warframe that, at least to my knowledge, we do not have an origin for. We don't know what they were doing. So this kicks out Warframes like Inaros, who we have a good amount of backstory about, Warframes like Protea, as I mentioned before, etc. And frames like Gauss, where I feel like we just know enough about them, or a good amount about them. I'm less interested. I'm more interested in doing a Warframe that's sort of in plain sight and whom I feel like we just don't get enough about. Another detail here is that we get some information about Warframes. The discussion about this that really interests me is how much do we know about what each of these Warframes was doing, right? And for Warframes like Hydroid, we have the Prime trailer, where Ballas, it's implied to be Ballas, is talking about sort of like the design pitch for the Warframe. If you haven't watched one of the Warframe Prime trailers, look up like the Hydroid Prime trailer or something, and think of it as you are, like, let's say the Orcan Council, and Ballas is pitching you, this is what my new concept for a Warframe is going to be, if that makes sense. Saren, her Prime trailer, also I think does a pretty good job of explaining. It's like she was designed, I guess, as a sort of counter to the Infested, partially. Not in game mechanics, in the lore, seemingly. They thought, oh, the Infested, what if we made, well, our own plague? People who know a lot about the lore, I know, just leave me alone. You know what I'm saying. So what Warframe should I pick? I've dirtled around long enough because it's hard to choose. The first Warframe that came to mind for me is Frost. I like the idea of Frost being a sort of... Frost feels to me like the quintessential Warframe you'd have as a bodyguard. They have such a nice... It reminds me of Nihil, the Glassmaker. It reminds me of this feeling of having... not necessarily an executioner like Nihil, but having a minion who has this terrifying power to kind of petrify or glassify or freeze solid. Maybe Atlas would be funny. Anyway, Frost, let's say, right? Atlas to me is kind of like a Warframe mafioso, with the two Rumbler bodyguards, and Atlas with his big, But Frost to me has a sort of a chic, kind of a mystique feeling about him, where I can imagine, going on your research trip or something, and you're aggressed by enemies, and Frost just like, huh, and they all get frozen, which I think is kind of badass. But what will we actually do? What are we actually doing? Personally, what I think is the most interesting to me about the idea of the Warframe the Warframe Empire, the Orokin Empire being now, is the societal consequences. Because right now, the world is utterly unprepared for immortality. I think what's really fascinating to me, I love the subject of biological immortality or life extension or just magical immortality. I don't want to die. I want to live a long, long life, much longer than I probably will. And so I love the idea. And one of the things that fascinates me so much about the idea is that a lot of the world's problems could be construed as being from people's ability to evade consequences by dying eventually. So, for example, why do rich people not care about the environment? I'm not all rich people, but a lot of very, very rich people are getting rich off of things like oil, which are overall bad for the environment, right? I get that you can just instantly transition out of those things, but a lot of people are not really trying, and you wonder why. I mean, if you have this money and you're selfish, you want the planet to be good for you, right? Not for everyone else. You apparently don't care, you selfish person, but surely you want the planet to be healthy, right? And I think the answer here is that, well, but the planet's fine now. It's just not going to be fine later. And in 100 years, when there are more problems, rich people will probably do more only for themselves to, I'm not saying all rich people are evil, I'm just simplifying for the sake of discussion, I'm sorry, to make things better, right? The reason, then, is that they're going to die. They don't need the planet to stay okay forever. They just need it to be okay enough for them for now. And if there was a way for them not to die, the interesting flip side of that coin is that if there's a way to avoid dying, you are now inherently choosing to die. The choice to not die means you now have the choice to die. And while a lot of people probably wouldn't go out of their way to live for a really long time, I know because they claim that they feel that way because I talk to people about this all the time. I think that they would change their tune a little bit if now it's not really that they need to choose to live forever, they need to choose to die now, which is a very different choice than choosing to live for a long time, right? And again, we're assuming it's not magic in all likelihood. You can still die, just not right now, right? You're not going to become somehow magically immortal and ascend to the physical realm, or maybe you are, but I'm thinking about a sort of biological immortality where like you could be stabbed and killed or get sick maybe. You're just not going to naturally expire if nothing else happens. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Not necessarily what's going on with the Orokin Empire, but anyway, it's this subject that interests me. So what I would be interested to hear or to see would be to go around with my Frost in tow and sort of not enforce, not preach, but put a little emphasis on the idea that you now have to take responsibility for your actions about this thing. Basically, my interest is to be a sort of somewhat mildly threatening immortality counselor. That idea. Maybe even to the Orokin. I think that there would be an interesting subject in the lore that I'm not familiar. I don't think there is at the moment, but talking about the consequences of the way the Orokin are immortal, where they basically body swap. That idea. And this feeling of sort of an ego death that we talk about, the subject I think of is Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, where we have people sort of plugging into a network. I won't talk about it anymore to avoid spoilers, and having this problem with maintaining their ego among a sea. There are other stories that tackle that subject. I think I would be interested in discussing that and having a sort of counseling experience like that. And if people say, this is the dark part, it's just a fantasy, folks, I'm not evil. If people say they absolutely refuse to, they just can't decide or whatever, you freeze them solid. Walt Disney them. And they can decide later, I guess. I don't know. Make the decision for them. Offer, maybe. We will say it in a nice way. We'll offer to make the decision for you. You don't want to decide to die now, and you don't want to decide to prolong your life, but you have to pick one or the other, and you're stressed out? No problem, my guy. We'll just put the problem off and put you on ice. And I imagine that my Frost Warframe, my Tenno assigned to my Frost Warframe, is going to feel, well, morally ambiguous about this. You did say I was going to become a bit immoral, did you not? And I imagine that you would have complicated feelings about doing such a thing. You would think, well, on the one hand, these people were in a state of emotional turmoil, and you're not making it worse. You tried to make it better, and I tried to make it better, and I failed. And so now I'm saying, well, the next best thing is to let you procrastinate. And so there you go, you know? But I would imagine that plenty of people in the world would eventually decide, okay, I see both sides of the argument, force the people to choose, let the people put off the choice, but no more. I've decided that people should get this option rather than one or the other. I'm not this kind of person. I'm the kind of person where I can never just throw away the benefit of the alternative. I can't ever lie to myself and say, this is just the right one, even though they both have some merits. No, I'm the person who sometimes problematically can never ignore the benefit of the other side of the argument. Even I might be able to say, okay, overall, on balance, I think this one is better. But I can't just decide, period. Whereas I would imagine a lot of people could. And so what say you that this frost-wielding Tenno thinks, you know, I've had enough of this. I feel like the Orokin, the High Council, is being a bit spoiled by being able to put off not only their own deaths, but even the decision whether to live or die, and irresponsibly shut the world out, as with the royalty of yore, who would hole up in their castle or their palace and write poetry or whatever, while the peasants went rioting and the society collapsed. No more, says the Tenno. I'm joining the rebellion. This is my story for the wielder of the Frost Warframe. Now, you said, what consequences did they leave behind in their wake? Well, some frozen people. Yeah, that's right. What about all those people that got iced? Does the Tenno decide, okay, I committed to not any longer allowing people to put off their decision? It's important. They need to take responsibility for the world we're living in. Okay, but what about the people you already froze? Should you just unthaw them? Are you going to kill them? Shatter them? Are you going to keep them frozen and say, what's done is done? They chose this thing. I won't rob them of their agency, but I'm not going to let anyone else make that choice. Or will you say, no, the very ability to have made that choice is wrong, and it represents a problem that I'm going to solve by releasing all of those people, putting a bunch of people back into society that are not ready to choose what they're going to do with their potentially very long or very short existence? I'm not sure. That will cause a complicated social problem, and I'm much less interested in what the Frost decides to do as to the fact that either way, they're either a bunch of iced Orokin that I'm going to interpret Frost because it's more interesting this way, but it doesn't really make sense, as being able to keep them frozen whether they like it or not, or thaw them whether they like it or not. Thawing them whether they like it or not, that makes sense. But it doesn't necessarily make sense for the Frost Warframe to be able to just permafrost the bodies. They're machines. Like, the Warframes are technically supposedly machines. There's no reason that the Frost Warframe should be able to just make them permanently. I don't know. It's not like Han Solo getting put in carbonite or whatever. Is that what that's called? Anyway, it's been a very long time since I watched that movie. You know, they can just be thawed out with a hairdryer or something, you know, a flash defroster, whatever, you know. Right? But it'd be interesting if the Frost was able to not do that. Or maybe the Frost Warframe and I have created a facility to store the icicled people, and maybe the Frost Warframe, as part of the rebellion, and their pilot, the Orokin, the operator, when rebelling from the Orokin Empire, takes control of that facility. And so it's not that those people somehow can't be unfrozen except by the Frost, but we don't have access to them. That facility is now captured. That'd be interesting. And then a lot of the Orokin Council is sort of held in icy hostage. That could be kind of fun. This was a fun question to answer. Thanks for asking. I hope I didn't come across as extremely evil and blatantly immoral, because I want the ability to carbonite people. I really hope that's what that's called.